When Keanu Reeves met Sandra Bullock again, the lights of the city blurred in the night as Keanu Reeves sat quietly in the back of a car, his head leaned against the window, his eyes fixed on the world outside, but his thoughts were somewhere far away. Life had given him fame, success, and the kind of recognition most people could only dream of. Yet behind all of that, there was still a man who carried silence in his heart. He had lost much. He had endured pain that very few knew about, and though he always smiled with humility, there were memories that never truly faded. Tonight, as the car rolled toward an event he had almost refused to attend, something unusual stirred inside him. It felt like the past was waiting for him, just around the corner. The event was a quiet gathering of actors, directors, and close friends celebrating a new film. Keanu had been invited as a guest of honor. He rarely enjoyed such moments, but something about this night carried a strange pull. As he stepped out of the car, photographers clicked, lights flashed, and people cheered softly. Yet Keanu stayed calm as he always did, nodding with gentle respect to everyone. Humility had always been his way, and people admired him for it. He walked through the entrance, shaking hands, sharing small smiles, listening more than he spoke. But then, without warning, his steps froze. Across the room, framed by the soft glow of the chandeliers, stood a woman he had not seen for years. Her laughter echoed light and genuine, and it struck a chord so deep that he forgot the noise of the room. It was Sandra Bullock. Their eyes met, and for a moment the years between them disappeared. Memories from the past rushed in. Memories of long days on film sets, of shared jokes, of silent glances that carried meaning no script could capture. He remembered the movie that had brought them together decades ago, the bond they had formed, and the quiet respect that had always lived between them. They had gone separate ways, building their own lives and careers, but that bond had never truly broken. And now here she was, standing only a few steps away, smiling at someone else, completely unaware that he was watching her. Keanu felt a wave of emotions he hadn't expected. It wasn't romance in the way movies portrayed it. It was something purer. Connection, understanding, the recognition of another soul who had once shared pieces of his journey. He hesitated, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. Should he walk over? Should he break the silence of time? Or should he simply watch from a distance, letting her live untouched by the past they had once shared? Before he could decide, Sandra turned her head. Her eyes caught his, and she froze, just as he had earlier. The smile on her lips faltered, replaced by a look of surprise, then warmth, then something deeper. She excused herself from the group she was with and began to walk toward him. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, and the room around them faded. It was as if the world had shrunk to the two of them, standing on opposite sides of memories they both carried in their hearts. "Keanu," she said softly when she reached him. Her voice was the same, filled with strength and kindness, but there was a tremor too, a tremor of emotions that words couldn't cover. "Sandra," he whispered back, and the way her name left his lips made her eyes glisten. For a moment they simply looked at each other, unable to speak, as if words might break the fragile truth of what they were feeling. Then Sandra smiled again, and with that smile came years of unspoken understanding. "It's been too long," she said. He nodded, still holding her gaze. "Too long," he repeated. But inside, his mind was racing. How do you explain years of silence? How do you share the storms you have survived when the person before you once knew the sunshine of your soul? There were things he wanted to say, but he kept them inside, as he always had, choosing instead to simply be present in the moment. They found themselves moving away from the noise of the room, slipping into a quieter corner where the lights were softer and the voices were distant. It felt natural, as if they had always belonged in moments like this. Sandra asked about his life, his projects, his journey, and he asked about hers, listening with genuine care. Yet beneath every word there was something unspoken, a reminder of the way they had once leaned on each other in silent ways. Even when the cameras weren't rolling, Sandra laughed at one of his quiet jokes, and the sound filled him with warmth. For years he had lived in shadows of grief and resilience, building walls to protect himself from further pain. But in her presence, some of those walls began to crack. He remembered how kind she had been to him during the early days, how she always treated him not as a star but as a human being. She had seen him, truly seen him, and that was rare. Their conversation deepened as the night moved forward. They spoke of past memories, of times when they were young and unsure, when life seemed endless. Sandra confessed that she had always admired the way he carried himself, his quiet strength, his refusal to let fame change who he was. Keanu, humbled, shook his head. "I just try to keep moving," he said. "Life has a way of reminding us what really matters." Her eyes softened. "And what matters to you, Keanu?" He paused. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Kindness, respect. Being there when someone needs you, even if they don't say it out loud." Sandra nodded, her own eyes misty. "You've always been that person," she said. "That's why people love you. Not just for what you do, but for who you are." His throat tightened and he had to look away. The weight of her words touched something deep inside him, a place he rarely let anyone reach. And in that silence, he realized something powerful. Life was not about the roles he played, the awards he received, or the fame that followed him. It was about moments like this, real, raw, human moments that stitched together the truth of existence. As the night grew older, neither of them wanted to leave. Yet beneath their smiles and gentle words there was tension. An unspoken question lingered between them. Why had fate brought them together again now after all these years? Was it chance? Or was it something more? Neither of them knew the answer, but they both felt the same pull, that this reunion was not ordinary. Something was beginning, something unexpected, and neither of them could walk away from it. When memories returned the next morning, Keanu sat by the wide glass window of his apartment, a cup of coffee untouched in his hand. The city outside was already alive with movement, but inside his home silence carried a weight he could not ignore. He kept replaying the night before in his mind, the way Sandra had looked at him, the sound of her laughter, the way her words had reached straight into the quiet corners of his heart. It had been years since he had felt something shift inside him so suddenly, yet along with that warmth came questions. Why now? Why after all this time? He thought about calling her, but hesitation held him back. Keanu was never one to rush. He had always believed in letting life move at its own pace, but this time his heart and his mind were at war. His heart told him that this moment, this reunion, meant something bigger than coincidence. His mind, however, reminded him of the losses he had endured, the people he had loved and lost, the fragility of opening himself again. He feared stepping into something he could not protect. While he was lost in thought, his phone vibrated on the table. When he picked it up, his chest tightened. It was a message from Sandra. "Thank you for last night. It felt like no time had passed at all. Would you like to meet for coffee today?" The simplicity of the words made him smile, but it also sent a surge of emotions through him. She wanted to see him again, and part of him wanted nothing more than to say yes. By afternoon, they were sitting together at a small cafe tucked away in a quiet street, far from the noise of fame and flashing cameras. The world knew them as stars, but here they were, just two people sharing a table. Sandra wore a casual sweater, her hair pulled back, her smile soft and genuine. Keanu, in his usual understated way, blended in with the crowd, though his presence always carried a quiet gravity. The moment felt strangely ordinary and yet extraordinary at the same time. They spoke of small things at first, the coffee, the weather, the books they had been reading. But soon the conversation deepened. Sandra asked him about his quiet years, the years when he had stepped back from the spotlight, choosing solitude over the constant chase of Hollywood. He admitted that those years were hard but necessary. Sometimes, he said, silence is the only way to heal. Sandra listened carefully, her eyes never leaving his. "I understand," she whispered. "I had my own battles too. There were moments I thought I would never get through, but somehow, life kept pushing me forward." Her voice trembled slightly, revealing more than her words. Keanu could feel the weight of her hidden pain, and though she didn't explain, he respected her silence. He knew what it meant to carry wounds that could not easily be spoken about. As they talked, something unspoken began to rise between them. It was not about love in the usual sense, but about recognition. They saw each other for who they were. Not the roles, not the fame, not the image the world created around them, but the human beings beneath all of it. That kind of connection was rare, and both of them knew it. But just as the warmth of the moment grew stronger, the past crept in like a shadow. A fan who recognized them approached their table, smiling with excitement. "Oh my God, Keanu, Sandra, it's like seeing Speed again." The words, though innocent, stirred something inside both of them. Suddenly, the cafe was not just a safe place, but a reminder of the time when their names were linked together, when rumors and headlines painted stories that were not always true. The fan left quickly after a polite photo, but the air at the table shifted. Sandra lowered her gaze. "Do you ever think about those days?" she asked softly. "The way people imagined things about us, the way they thought they knew our story, when really they didn't?" Keanu nodded slowly. "I think about it sometimes. They saw what they wanted to see. But they didn't know what was real. He paused, then added, "But we knew, and that was enough." Her eyes lifted to his again, and in them he saw a flicker of something, longing maybe, or regret. "I sometimes wonder," she whispered, "if we should have fought harder for what was real back then." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Keanu felt a sudden ache in his chest. Was she speaking of friendship? Of love that had never been spoken aloud? Of moments lost to silence? He didn't know, but the honesty in her voice shook him. He wanted to ask her what she meant, to reach out and take her hand. But the fear of breaking the fragile peace between them stopped him. Instead, he said gently, "Maybe we're here now because we didn't then. Maybe life gives us chances when we're finally ready." Sandra's lips curved into a small, almost bittersweet smile. "Maybe," she said, but her eyes carried both hope and sadness. They left the cafe together, walking slowly along the quiet street. The evening light painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the world seemed to soften around them. For a moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. Yet beneath the beauty of it all, Keanu felt the storm of something deeper beginning to form. He didn't know what it was yet, but he knew this reunion was leading them toward something far more complicated than either of them could predict. The weight of silence, the days after their cafe meeting, passed in a haze for Keanu. He went about his routine, but his mind returned again and again to Sandra. Her smile, her words, the tremor in her voice when she wondered if they should have fought harder for what was real. He felt something inside him stirring, something he thought he had buried long ago. Yet along with that stirring came unease. He had always lived with caution when it came to his heart. He knew how fragile it was to open up, how dangerous it could be to let himself feel too deeply again. Sandra, meanwhile, found herself staring at old photographs. Some were from their first film together, when they were both young, uncertain, and filled with unspoken dreams. In those pictures, their eyes always seemed to find each other, even in a crowd. Back then, she had told herself it was just friendship, just trust between two actors trying to make a story come alive. But now, looking back, she wondered if she had denied something truer. She whispered to herself, almost afraid of her own thoughts. Why does it still feel the same after all these years? A week later, fate brought them together once more. They had both been invited to a charity event in Los Angeles. Keanu arrived quietly, dressed in his usual understated way, never seeking attention. Sandra entered the room with her usual warmth, greeting everyone with kindness. But when their eyes found each other across the crowded hall, the world seemed to pause again. People around them laughed, glasses clinked, conversations filled the air. But between them there was only silence, a silence heavy with everything unspoken. They eventually slipped away from the crowd and found themselves standing on a balcony overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, the sky scattered with stars, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It was Sandra who finally broke the silence. "I keep thinking about what you said," she admitted, her voice soft. "Maybe we're here now because we weren't ready before." Keanu turned toward her, his face unreadable, but his eyes carried depth. "Do you think we're ready now?" he asked. Her breath caught, and for a long moment she didn't answer. Then she whispered, "I don't know. I'm afraid, Keanu. Afraid of what people will say. Afraid of what it could cost us. But more than that, I'm afraid of what it might awaken." He understood. He too carried that fear. Not of the world's judgment. He had long learned to live beyond that. But of the vulnerability that came with opening the heart again. He thought of the losses he had endured, the people he had loved who were no longer here, the nights of loneliness that had shaped him, and yet standing here with her, he realized that some fears were meant to be faced, not avoided. "Maybe," he said slowly, "the things we fear the most are the things we need the most." Sandra's eyes glistened, and she turned her gaze back to the city below. "You always make it sound so simple," she whispered. "But it isn't simple, Keanu. Life has changed. We've changed." He stepped closer. Not too close, but enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. "Yes," he said gently, "but maybe the truth hasn't changed." Her eyes flicked to his, and in that moment it was as if years collapsed into a single heartbeat. She wanted to believe him, but doubt still weighed on her. Yet before she could speak again, the sound of someone calling her name broke the spell. A friend approached, pulling her back into the crowd, and just like that, the moment was gone. That night when Sandra returned home, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his words. Maybe the truth hasn't changed. What truth had he meant? The truth of their bond? The truth of unspoken love? Or the truth of something even deeper? Something neither of them had dared to face. Her heart pounded with questions, but no answers came. Keanu, too, lay awake in his quiet home, staring at the ceiling. He thought of her smile on the balcony, the fear in her voice, the way her eyes had searched his. He felt the weight of silence pressing down on him. He had always been good at keeping his heart guarded, but now that silence was no longer enough. He knew he couldn't hide from it forever. Something had been reignited, and it would only grow stronger the more he tried to deny it. What neither of them knew was that the world around them was already beginning to notice. The photographs from the charity event showed them together on the balcony, laughing quietly, standing closer than they had in years. Headlines began to whisper, and social media buzzed with speculation. Fans wondered if the two stars had found their way back to each other, while they tried to stay silent. The world outside was already writing a story of its own. When the world began to watch, the morning after the charity event, Sandra's phone buzzed with messages. Her friends, her manager, even strangers online had filled her inbox with the same question. What's going on with you and Keanu? At first she tried to ignore it, but then she saw the photographs, her and Keanu on the balcony smiling softly, his presence close beside hers. To the outside world it looked like something more than friendship, something that carried the glow of intimacy. She closed her eyes, her chest tightening. She knew the world loved stories like this, but she also knew the truth was more complicated than any headline could capture. Keanu, too, woke to the same wave of attention. Articles with his name next to Sandra's filled the internet. Some were harmless, playful speculation. Others carried weight, asking if this was the romance fans had waited for all these years. Keanu scrolled through the words in silence, his face calm but his mind restless. He had always lived a private life, never chasing the spotlight when it came to matters of the heart. Yet now, the light was burning brightly on something fragile, something he wasn't even sure how to define. Later that day, they spoke on the phone. Sandra's voice was tired. It's everywhere, Keanu. They're already writing a story we haven't even figured out ourselves. He paused before answering, his tone quiet but steady. Let them write. We know what's real, she sighed. But do we? I don't even know what to call this. What we're feeling, what we're doing. Maybe we don't need to call it anything yet, he said softly. Maybe it's enough to just be here now. Her silence lingered, and then she whispered, I want to believe that. But believing was not easy. The days that followed brought more attention. Paparazzi cameras waited outside restaurants. Fans shouted their names when they appeared together, and every word they spoke in public seemed to echo louder than intended. Sandra, though kind and graceful, began to feel the pressure. She had always guarded her personal life carefully, especially after heartbreaks she never spoke about. Opening up again, especially under the world's watch, felt terrifying. Keanu noticed her unease. One evening, they met in a quiet park far from the cameras. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Children laughed in the distance, their joy pure and untouched. They sat together on a bench, their voices low. I don't know if I can do this, Sandra confessed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The world doesn't let people like us have something simple. They twist it, break it, and turn it into something else. What if we lose ourselves in it? Keanu listened, his gaze steady on her. I can't promise the world will stop watching, he admitted. But I can promise that I will never let it take away who we are. Not yours, not mine. I've lived too long knowing how fragile life is. I won't waste time hiding from something real. Her eyes softened, and for a moment tears threatened to fall. You always make it sound so clear, she whispered. But what if we fall, Keanu? What if we open this door and it breaks us? He leaned closer, his voice low, filled with honesty. Then at least we'll know we were brave enough to try. Her breath caught, and for the first time she let herself smile through her fear. That smile carried both hope and surrender, as if a small piece of her heart had finally unclenched. Yet even as they shared that fragile moment, trouble was already stirring. A journalist had followed them to the park, snapping photos from a distance. By the next morning, the images spread everywhere. Keanu and Sandra on the bench, their faces close, her eyes filled with something unguarded. The headlines grew louder, harsher. Secret meetings, rekindled love. Hollywood's most private stars caught in the open. The world was no longer just watching, it was demanding answers. The breaking point, the storm grew louder with each passing day. Headlines followed them wherever they went. Television hosts debated their every glance, and social media painted 1,000 versions of their story. To the world, it was a dream come true, the reunion of two beloved stars finally stepping into what fans had always imagined. But to Keanu and Sandra, it was a test neither of them had prepared for. Sandra sat in her living room one evening, scrolling through her phone. Every headline carried her name beside his. Some were kind, hopeful. Others were invasive, filled with questions about her past, her choices, her worth. She threw the phone aside and pressed her face into her hands. The weight of it all was crushing her. She had spent years building a life outside the chaos of fame, and now that peace was breaking apart. Her phone rang. It was Keanu. She almost didn't answer, but then she heard his voice, calm and steady, and her walls cracked. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. She let out a shaky laugh. "I don't know. I feel like the whole world is standing at my door waiting for me to explain something I can't even explain to myself." He was silent for a moment before saying, "Then don't explain. You don't owe them that." Her eyes filled with tears. "But maybe I owe myself an answer. Maybe I owe us an answer." His words came slowly, each one carrying weight. "Then maybe it's time we stop running from it." The silence that followed was thick. Her heart pounded because she knew he was right. They had been circling around their feelings, hiding behind friendship, behind the fear of what the world might think. But now the world had already decided for them, and all that was left was the truth. A week later, they agreed to meet at Keanu's house. The cameras had grown relentless, and it was one of the few places they could find peace. The night was quiet when Sandra arrived, the city lights glowing faintly outside the tall windows. Keanu welcomed her in with his usual humility, offering tea, making sure she felt safe. Yet beneath his calm presence, she sensed the same restlessness that lived inside her. They sat across from each other, the air thick with words unsaid. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. "Keanu," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are we doing? Are we just pretending this is nothing? Or are we too afraid to admit what it is?" His eyes searched hers, steady and kind but filled with truth. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said. "Not with you. Not with what I feel." Her breath caught. "And what do you feel?" For the first time in years, Keanu let his guard fall completely. "I feel like you've been with me even when you weren't there. I feel like the years didn't erase anything. They only made me realize how much I missed what we had, what we never said. I don't know where this will lead, Sandra. I don't know if we'll stumble, or if the world will tear it apart. But I know one thing. I don't want to lose this chance." Her heart pounded so loudly she thought he could hear it. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't look away. "You always carry the weight of the world with such quiet strength," she whispered. "And somehow you still make space for kindness. Do you know what that does to me? It makes me wonder why I ever let you go." He reached across the table, his hand hovering for a moment before she placed hers in his. The touch was simple, but it carried years of silence, years of longing, years of truth. Yet just as that fragile connection grew stronger, a sudden noise shattered the moment. Outside, flashes of cameras lit up the night. Paparazzi had found them, climbing the walls of his privacy to capture what was meant to be theirs alone. Sandra flinched, pulling her hand back, her eyes wide with panic. "See?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is what I'm afraid of. They won't let us have this. They'll twist it until there's nothing left." Keanu stood, his face calm but his jaw set with quiet determination. "Then let them," he said. "Because no matter what they do, the truth is still the truth." Sandra stared at him, her heart torn between fear and hope. She wanted to believe him, to trust that their truth was strong enough. But a shadow lingered in her mind, the fear that the world would consume them before they had even begun. That night ended without answers. She left his house with her heart aching, her mind spinning, torn between the life she had built and the possibility of a new one with him. Keanu stood by the window long after she was gone, watching the lights of the city flicker, whispering to himself words he had never dared to say aloud. "Don't let this be another loss." The truth revealed days passed, heavy with silence. Sandra avoided interviews, ignoring questions about Keanu. He too kept quiet, carrying himself with his usual humility. But the pressure only grew. Every magazine cover showed their faces. Every headline demanded answers. And beneath the noise, both of them struggled with the same question. Was this bond worth risking everything? One evening, Sandra found herself staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her heart ached with conflict. She thought of all the years she had spent building walls, protecting herself from the pain of losing what mattered most. Yet when she thought of Keanu, those walls began to feel like cages. His kindness, his steady strength, his quiet truth. They had reminded her of something she had once buried. She whispered to herself, "What am I so afraid of? Losing him or admitting I need him?" That same night, Keanu sat alone with his thoughts. He thought of the people he had loved and lost, the moments of grief that had shaped him, and he realized something simple, something undeniable. Life was too fragile to waste on silence. If he let this moment pass, it might never return. The turning point came a few days later. They both attended a charity gala, invited months before. Neither wanted to go, but fate had its own design. The cameras flashed as they entered separately, but everyone watched, waiting for them to meet. Inside, the air was thick with expectation. Keanu spotted Sandra across the room. She looked graceful, strong, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside her. He walked toward her, each step deliberate, and when he reached her, the room seemed to hush. Whispers rose, cameras turned, the world leaned closer. "Sandra," he said softly, but the microphone nearby caught his voice. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Keanu!" The silence was unbearable. The crowd was waiting. The world outside was watching, but in that moment it was only them. He took a breath, his voice steady but filled with raw honesty. "We've spent years hiding behind silence, but the truth is you've always mattered to me, more than I ever said, more than I ever dared to admit. I don't care what the headlines write or what the cameras show. All I care about is this: I don't want to lose you again." Gasps rippled through the room. Sandra's eyes filled with tears, her heart pounding. For years she had carried doubts, but now hearing his truth spoken aloud, the fear inside her began to break. She stepped closer, her voice trembling but clear. "You've always been the one person who saw me for who I really am. You gave me strength when I didn't even know I needed it. And maybe I was afraid before, but not anymore. Not with you." And there, in front of the cameras, in front of the world, she reached for his hand. Keanu's fingers closed around hers, firm and steady. And in that simple touch, the years of silence finally ended. The crowd erupted into applause, but neither of them heard it. All they felt was the truth between them, the truth that had never changed, no matter how much time had passed. Later that night, away from the lights and the noise, they stood together on a quiet street, the cool night air wrapping around them. Sandra leaned into him, her voice soft. "Do you think we can survive the weight of the world watching us?" Keanu smiled gently, his arm around her. "We've survived worse. And this time we're not alone." She closed her eyes, resting against him, her heart finally at peace. For the first time in years she felt free, not from the world but from her own fear. And beside her, Keanu felt the same. The world would keep talking, the cameras would keep flashing, but none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was this second chance. What mattered was the truth they had finally chosen to embrace.